What is your impression? What's going on in Africa? Well, I mean, anyway, there are countries where of which data is not available or hardly available. So, what's your expert opinion? What's going on there?
Yeah.
No NGOs? Less?
Absolutely not. You know, there are probably more NGOs, depending on how you define it, in China than in any country on earth, including the U.S. If you include the informal groups, there could easily be 2 million organizations operating. In terms of registered, it's probably 450,000. In the U.S., we have, we have very squishy numbers on the total, but the ones that actually are registered and report to our tax authorities is about 300,000. So China's is ahead of us in terms of numbers. But there are very robust nonprofit sectors in many parts of those worlds, and certainly in India. Japan is a little different. Japan went through a long period where there was a much more controlling state and much more deference. And so in order to get a nonprofit, you had to have somebody from some ministry on your board who would work through the system. It used to be that was the case in China, as you may know. They use what we call the grandmother provision. You had to find a state organ, including an enterprise, a state enterprise, who would vouch for you, who would sign your papers, who would review your books. And it was obviously a control mechanism. It broke down because the businesses signing it were simply not paying it. You know, they were choosing to sign it just as a pro forma mechanism. It wasn't exercising any real control. It has been eliminated. That provision has been eliminated. So there has been a pretty significant growth of nonprofits in China. I wouldn't say that it's as free as it is in our country, but it clearly is on the road in that direction. So, you know, I could go through other parts of Africa having similar stories. You know, it depends a lot, you know, as you point out, on the regime. In general, you know, my view is that where the government is supportive and the sector grows, faster and more robustly. And there are lots of governments that are supportive. I would say Kenya, I would say at least until recently, Uganda, South Africa, Mozambique. And we are, you know, we're doing a revision of this UN handbook on nonprofit institutions, bring it up to date because there was a significant shift, revision of the basic system of national accounts in 2008. And we're gearing up to make another push to get other countries to implement this. The countries are not required to do it, they are strongly encouraged to, and there were various steps taken in the revision that will increase the pressure on them to do that.
Any other questions?
Mr. Salomon, thank you for your lecture. Can I ask the question related to my thesis? I want to know, does the European NGOs struggle from the austerity conditions now, or it's already gone, I guess?
Yeah, I can now answer that because we're doing a project called Third Sector Impact for the European Union. And part of it is looking at the barriers faced by European nonprofits. And the interesting thing to me is that the story that is being told in Western Europe now is very, very similar to the story I told in a book that I just published called The Resilient Sector, Revisited. And it's a shift of the center of gravity of the sector from, you know, now government and very small philanthropy much more into the market, much more use of commercial income, but enormous resilience as the sector struggles with contracted government support. So retrenchment is very much on the agenda in Europe for the sector. And the interesting thing is to see how it has really very cleverly begun to shift its funding base towards commercial sources. And organizations are going much more complicated, so they may have multiple products sold to multiple audiences, some of which cross-subsidize the care for people who can't pay. So there's a lot of that activity. So I would say, if you're working directly on that, then you may want to take a look at the website of this so-called TSI project, Third Sector Impact Project. You can go on the web and look up some of the material that's coming out of it. There are several PowerPoint presentations and country studies that are going to be going up on that. And so they tell this story of retrenchment and how the organizations are coping with it.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I was thinking that basically you drew a very positive picture of third sector organizations and third sector as such. And I was wondering if we have any reasons to distrust the third sector as this third force of economic growth, economic development, or anything like this.
Yeah, it's a very good question.
I was wondering what's your take on this?
Yeah. So, it's a really good question, and obviously states around the world are cracking down on that basis, or somewhat on that basis. So I think what this calls into question is the need, the kind of curious need for tight regulation of this sector. I hate to be an advocate of that, but I think this is a sector that depends crucially on public trust. So how do you achieve public trust? You have to have rules that keep out the bad apples. And those rules are not universal. Transparency is not universal. The sector is frequently very cautious about becoming too transparent because they fear, as you point out, they fear the government control will result from that. But at the end of the day, if they're not very strong non-distribution rules and the capacity to regulate on it, and similarly rules against conflict of interest, this sector can very quickly get a bad name. And I think in this country there have been circumstances in which there's a bit of how should I say it, we would say in the U.S. you're winking at bad practice. You're not taking it seriously. One of the areas where I understand this is happening here is in the rules for contracting out to kindergartens. And the law says that only nonprofits can be contracted out to. People in the ministries apparently know that a lot of the entities that are being contracted out to are really disguised for-profit entities. But they're not willing to call it because they don't have any alternative. And so they're letting this all go by. So in a way the law is being violated, but everybody's accepting it and living with it. So that's not a healthy situation. So I think the answer to you is, I think you're right, there is a danger. And the way to deal with the danger at a minimum is to have good self-regulation of the sector. But ultimately I think you need governmental regulation.
I would have maybe a question because I don't see any further questions.
Okay.
But if you speak about global civil society, do you speak really about global situation or just about summary of national civil societies? Because actually you showed only these examples of different countries. But somewhere in the 90s we were especially so enthusiastic about globalization and global civil society building and so on. And what is going on now? Do you see this disappointment also, or I don't know, speak about this?
No, I don't see disappointment, but I haven't focused on the organizations that only do cross-national activity, but I think there's been a steady increase in all the different facets of globalization. And one manifestation of it is the creation of networks of associations, of foundations, networks of associations of organizations. So there's something called WINGS. I don't know if you heard of WINGS. So what is WINGS? WINGS stands for something, but I can't exactly tell you. Worldwide Network of Grant-Making Institutions, something like that. So many countries now have an association of foundations representing the foundations, but WINGS is an association of these associations. And we have a similar thing in the non-government field, where there are associations of country-level associations of nonprofits. So all of this networking is absolutely occurring in the nonprofit field. And there are conferences around these things, there are websites, there's trading of practice, there's training activity. So this is a little different from what I think you were asking about, which are individual organizations that are really cross-national delivery agents. And they have grown too, you know, things like Oxfam and Save the Peace and Save the Children, Greenpeace.
So when speaking about global civil society, we can speak about both.
I think so, yeah. I think you have associations of in-country nonprofits, but then you have these linkages among both the individual organizations and the associations of associations.
Just to follow up on this discussion about global and local context, I'm just wondering, when it comes to the literature, there is a rather popular idea that non-governmental organizations in a local context which have strong connections to global actors like global fundings or global donors. So these organizations are less incentive to make collaborations in local context with grassroots. And I'm just wondering, what's your opinion on that? What's your experience?
Well, I think these global nonprofit organizations are getting the message that they have to do better than that. I don't know that it's universal, but I know a lot of the ones that I am in contact with, you know, make a big point of trying to indigenize staff to connect with the local communities. So all I can say is I think it's better than it used to be. It's probably not ideal, but I think there's a real mantra within that community of local international development agencies to connect to the indigenous populations. I'm not sure that I think some of the international development organizations, the governmental ones, do a better job of this than others. I can't say that the one that is in my country does the best job. They have a very narrow view of what the civil society sector is. But the Swedish agency, the Canadian agency, to some extent DFID in the UK, I think they really do a much clearer job of connecting to the local people. At least that's my impression.
Okay, so maybe some last questions. Yeah.
Thank you very much for brilliant presentation. Gives a very comprehensive picture of organized, institutionalized civil society. But a part of civil society are also non-institutionalized groups of the citizens. And there is a big boom during last maybe 10 years of these groups, and they are very effective, they are very well organized many times, and also sometimes it seems that it's much more interesting to make research on them. What is your opinion about research about this part of civil society?
Yeah, I guess what I'd say first of all is that the reason we went after for the first time volunteer data is precisely to capture that. You know, and a lot of what we're reporting as volunteering is really informal groups of people that are getting together, self-help groups or whatever. And it's absolutely true that it's booming. We just finished a paper in which we tried to see whether the gap is closing between the North and the South when you bring direct volunteering in. This is volunteering that takes place outside of organizations because there's long been a feeling that all the all the studies of volunteering only focused on the organization-based volunteering. This is true of the German survey and the British survey and the US survey of volunteering. And so the argument is if we just were to go after and it shows that there's more volunteering in the north than there is in the south, southern countries. So if you went after the direct volunteering, the picture would change radically and you would suddenly see a narrowing in the gap. So we did some analysis and we came up with a kind of, I don't know, both sides of the argument got support. Yes, when you bring in the direct volunteering, the volunteering rates in the south go up, but so do the ones in the north. In fact, the north is keeping the balance pretty much what it was before we measured the direct volunteering. It's not that the south is not doing as well, it's that the north is doing better. And it's all of this, what you're describing is informal activity. Some of it is person to person, but some of it is self-help or informal. And we don't measure volunteering the way we measure the size of the sector. We do it through household surveys. And this was a big point of the manual on the measurement of volunteer work that we got the ILO to do. The reason we went to the International Labor Organization is that they are in charge of the labor force surveys, which are the largest surveys done in every country around the world, including this one. You know, Rostat, every month they have a cadre of people that they interview, and they interview in the home. These are household surveys. So you're not simply looking at the volunteering being done through organizations, which you would get if you wanted to talk to the organizations. You're going to people alone, and you're asking them, okay, we've just been asking about your paid work. Have you done any work without pay? And what is it? What did you do? And how many hours did you spend in the last month doing it? And once you have those three things, you know, what did you do, and how many hours, and what the time period is, you can calculate the value of it, because what you do translates into an occupation, and then statisticians have big files in which they have average wage for each occupation. So if you are a brain surgeon and you were serving people food at a food kitchen, you would get assigned to you the value of the job that you told people that you did. So not the salary of a brain surgeon, but the salary of somebody who is a cook or a waiter in a restaurant. So this was the whole idea of trying to go using labor force surveys to gather this data. We wanted to pick up the informal volunteering, what you're describing as this informal activity that's exploded so much.
Okay, thank you very much. I think now the time is really over, but yeah, thank you for this very important lecture, and I think it brings us to many different ideas, and you have referred to many books, so we can find them in the internet. So thank you very much. I'd like to especially thank Evgeny. Особенное спасибо Евгению за перевод. Спасибо большое. Он выдержал.